This is Dr. George. This is Citizens Gone Wild, and we're here with my friend Larry. And we're going to talk about two issues. One is the withdrawal from Afghanistan, and then I'll try and explain critical race theory, which is coming to your neighborhood school very shortly. For years, actually, I thought that we should get out of Afghanistan. And I did admire Biden because he could make a decision which other recent presidents, could not. Now, I'm not going to talk very much about how it was executed. It was probably the worst execution of any military effort that I've seen in my lifetime. But I wanted to talk more about something else. Did he do the right thing by leaving or not? Now, a lot of people have said, well, 20 years is enough. But we've had people in places like Japan and Germany, Europe, for 50 years. And it costs a lot more than this. We had 2,500 troops there. None of them have been shot in the last year and a half. The amount of money it took to stay there was minimal compared with the tens of billions and more tens of billions and more tens of billions that it costs to stay in Japan and Western Europe, not to mention all the other little places we are in that you haven't heard about, such as Nigeria.
George,
Yeah.
am I allowed to interject or should I wait?
No, you should interject.
All right, there are a couple of problems so far with what you've said in my mind. Number one is that I think we do need to talk to some extent about the execution of the withdrawal, because I think the critical word is execution. Number two is, unlike Japan and Germany, well, I could argue that we have way overstayed our welcome because the events that caused us to be needed there are no longer so much needed, especially in Germany, where the Soviet Union is not the existential threat it once was. We were not wanted in Afghanistan. The only reason that I could perhaps see us being in Afghanistan is that maybe it would hold the hordes somewhat from the border of getting really into Pakistan and then spreading mischief all along the Hindu Kush into India. Other than that, I felt there was no real redeeming value of us pouring money down an endless drain.
That's what I thought. But then I read an article that suggested the following. This article suggested that we are fighting a general Islamic onslaught against the West.
And that is true.
And that is part of the onslaught. And we have just given a lot of courage and to the people that in effect we are fighting, that there is something similar about Islam all around the world. And the only place where Muslims act pretty well is in places where they're a small minority. We are faced with a situation where Muslims, to some degree, many of them in the West, are sympathetic with the overall aim of Islam, which is Taliban fighter said, our goal is to conquer the world. Now,
wait a minute, George, you're absolutely right. Remember, I think I sent you an article, but basically the Taliban had, according to that article, and I can't reference specifically where I read it, it may have been the Allgemeiner, where the Taliban had three goals. Number one is that basically, not goals, but three issues. Number one is that to them, if they lost 100 people or 200 people or 500 people, it didn't matter because they have a well of volunteers that will go fight because they're dying for jihad and they're going to have a better life up there than they are down here, according to their belief. Number two, this is not a war that we look at in a 5 or 10 or 20-year period. This is the same war that had been going on since 700 AD worldwide. And, we're now seeing the wave coming back at us, much as it did in Europe in the Crusades in the 1100s and at the gates of Vienna in 1682, I think it was.
All right. I'm just going to make one more attempt at putting this other person's position forward. We have lost our nerve, perhaps, our verve, something. Look, for example, at the use of the word Islamic phobic. In the blink of an eye, we have all shut up and voicing any criticism of Islam. And it's done by using a phrase that was actually made up, consciously made up, to keep us from talking and criticizing Islam in any way. And now you see people who include Islam in all the groups that we have to protect. I mean, in the United States, against discrimination. You don't hear a word about on college campuses, Muslims continuously demand genocide against the Jews of the Middle East. And the idea is that it is a worldwide fight. And by bugging out there, we sort of turned tail and gave confidence to the other side. You buy any of that?
Absolutely agree with you. But the problem is that we as America do not have time on our side, nor do we have popular opinion.
Okay.
I mean, there's probably very little difference between, since we, as you said, there hadn't been a U.S. death in Afghanistan in a year and a half, to have kept a minimal force in there probably would not have been a major deal. But the bigger issue is how much corruption were we just going to put up with? We send money there and the money would filter into the hands of who, where, what, when, how, and why, and we don't know.
That's true. That's true. All right, I'll let that go.
Well, no, let's ask.
No,
Now that this has happened, George, where do we go from here?
I agree with that. I've had Afghanistanians that I met in New York who said, we guarantee the money is in banks in the United States. Let me switch to something that is coming soon to your neighborhood, if it's not already there. Critical race theory. 5 minutes ago, not one American out of 8 million would have had the slightest idea what that means. There are two views of the universe, now try and hang on to this, that are now battling it out. One says that there are universal values in the world, values that are universal and eternal, given to us by God if you're a Jew or a Christian, or natural law if you're an ancient Greek. The view is the new view, the view that is overtaken and I think is actually winning on college campuses and in the media, is that everything we have around us is man-made. There is no universal law that says this value is better than that value. Of all things, my rabbi sent out a missive about this very subject. The issue is rolling through the world right now, whether you like it or not, and it is influencing what your child is taught in school, whether you know that or not. It is the latest product, in my opinion, of the new ruling class, critical race theory. I'm going to read you a sort of neutral definition now. Critical race theory is a body of scholarship and academic movement that shows the intersection of race and US law that is challenging mainstream liberal approaches to racial justice and is now being inculcated in your child, probably in K through 12, but certainly when they go to college. Let me give you some of the common themes. And if this doesn't make sense at all, take it easy. It eventually will make sense and it will probably infuriate you to boot. First of all, it's a critique of liberalism. In Western Europe, in America, we had a certain view of things. And the idea was that old-fashioned liberal democracy was the way to go. That is, government should help people when they fall down, when they're old, when they're sick, when they're a child, when they need an education. But other than that, its only job is to maintain our rights and liberties. It emphasized rationality. Rationality was thought to be the crown jewel of Western civilization. No more. Legal equality before the law. No more. Race-conscious approach to social transformation. No more. And let me go on and just give you all of this at once before you leap on it, although it needs leaping. We now have a revisionist interpretation of American history, which is now viewed, American history is now viewed as uniformly foul, uniformly wrong, uniformly bad. Very little credit is given for the civil rights advancements that you and I see. Things are pictured in a very dark way. There are all sorts of clever little pieces of this. One is intersectional theory. This is the theory that all oppression belongs in the same category. And this is the type of theory that says that Jews are not an oppressed group and haven't been an oppressed group and should not be included among those who are oppressed because they are white. And this intersectional theory says that it is the whiteness of Jews that should be emphasized, and they should not receive any special support at all. There's another thing. This is called, and by God, if you spend time memorizing all of this, you're a fool, standpoint epistemology. This is the view that a member of a minority has a special authority to speak on race. And white people basically have very little authority, if any, to speak about race. Other groups do not have this authority. If you're a member of a government-preferred minority group, such as Blacks, lately Browns have been brought into this circle, then you do have a right to talk about racism in the history of the United States. They basically say that middle-class African Americans have different interests than middle-class white people. There's another thing that's really important in this whole mishigas about critical race theory, which I find particularly aggravating. And it basically divides the whole world into oppressed and oppressors. That's it. And if you're not oppressed, for example, you're white middle class, then you are, by definition, somehow an oppressor. Those are the only categories that are available. And this idea has now been taught in all colleges and universities, all the major ones anyway. And this is why so many people say, I sent my son to college and he came back a different person. He probably went thinking, this is not a bad place. This is kind of nice. We have liberty, we have democracy, we have prosperity. But he was told, no, all of those are ill-gotten gains. They have been taken from someone else. They're only oppressors or oppressed. Which one do you want? And this, of course, drives people who are a little older nuts. what has happened in the last year or two is that this attitude has started to be taught to little children. K through 12 are now being taught, and sometimes it's fought, sometimes it's not fought, but basically it's rolling right along here. You're either an oppressor or you're an oppressed, and if you're white, you're in trouble.
You're guilty until proven innocent.
Exactly. That's a good phrase, better than mine, actually. You're guilty until proven innocent. Does it say that all white people are racist? Isn't that racist? Well, it kind of does. You may have seen this guy, Ibram Kendi, has a book out, How to Be an Anti-Racist. It's a bestseller. It's a bestseller. And he's, excuse me, and he goes around the country propagating this idea of critical race theory. And he says that at this point, things are still so bad that we may need inequity. That is, we may need to favor people, black and brown people, for example, so that we can fight against racism.
Well, George, I mean, I've kept quiet up until now, which is rather difficult. But do you know that many of the new federal government programs that are being propagated have specific things for black farmers, for black entrepreneurs, for black and women specifically, so that they get a preferential either first crack or a higher cut of the pie for all sorts of programs. That doesn't mean that their ideas are better or their businesses are better, but because they were, and to some extent justifiably denied in the past, that doesn't mean now we have to make it up for them by not only leveling the playing field, but making the playing field tilt in their favor.
Exactly. And here's the thing. Last night on 60 Minutes, they backed it up. Last night on 60 Minutes, they were haranguing people who weren't going along with the program. And they were very explicit. The host was very explicit in making it clear that if you don't go along with this, then you're doing wrong. And,
you know, I grew up in an era. Now, I understand that during my lifetime, there have been many inequities done to minorities. I also know that when you look at what's been going on in, say, 1960 compared to 2015 and 2016, the rights of blacks and rights of Hispanics, et cetera, have gotten far better than they were before. I also know that a huge amount of money has been spent to give programs specifically to the poor and the disadvantaged to improve their lives. Head Start, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
Instead of that,
the money's been
the money has not necessarily been well spent. We're seeing more and more single-family homes. We're seeing more and more the breakdown of society, and so therefore the money has not been well spent, and now we're being given this drivel.
I agree, and I think most Americans, certainly all white, and I suspect a lot of brown folks. But look at what has happened. First of all,
let's talk about the Asians. The Asians are now being excluded because they're too bright.
Right, they're too smart. And also the brown people, all of a sudden I hear about a black-brown alliance. There is no black-brown alliance. Blacks and brown tend to be very, very antagonistic toward each other. Very. And
well, most Hispanics are, at least at the initial, very conservative, very religious, really brought up with the values of the church, for better or for worse. So they may be anti-Semitic, but they're also conservative values, which is not what the black, the black want to be part of society, but now they don't want to be part of society. They want to be their separate little. Instead of bringing people together, we are atomizing people more and
We
more
are
and more.
atomizing people. And the last time we atomized people and defined people by their race, we call that the Civil War. I think these people don't realize what dynamite they're playing with.
I think they don't care.
Oh.
Now, let's call a spade. This is bad, but I'm gonna say it anyway. Let's call a spade a spade. And I don't mean it in the derogatory sense. Black population is 13 or 15% of the population. It is still a minority. It may be that the white population is going to be a minority as of the next census, but the black population is still a minority compared to the white, compared to the brown, etc.
By the way, a lot of surveys have been done on this area, and about 40% of the browns view themselves as white.
Wait a minute, let's talk about Jews for a minute. We have the luxury of being to the black population, we're white, and to the white conservative population, we're the devil and not white. So we can't even they can't even make up their mind what we are. We're the worst of all possible evils.
Plus, there's a tremendous amount of intermarriage. The senoritas have proven themselves to be very, very popular with white men. I think what has happened here is blacks have stopped making progress and are in a lot of trouble, especially in the inner city. And they want someone to be held accountable. There are only two groups. Either they're accountable or we're accountable.
Well, wait 1 minute. Let's go back on that a little bit. I again submit to you that this isn't so much the breakdown of the family unit.
Yes, exactly.
I mean, you have kids who do not have stable households, do not have father figures. I mean, many studies have shown that even in the black neighborhood where you have father figures who are relatively stable, whether it be boys club or something like this, the kids turn out somewhat better.
They turn out a lot better, a lot better. There was an article in the Wall Street Journal, of all things, about critical race theory. And this guy suggested that we can be saved if we break up the big school districts into small school districts, because when you talk to people as individuals, they tend to be against this. But I think, I'm going to make a nasty prediction, that this thing will continue to flow like a river and it will overtake our educational system.
Well, look what's happening in California.
Let me say why. Yes, books are important, but in the end, what you learn is what you learn from the teacher. That is true, I think, across the board, K through 12, college and graduate school.
No, but college.
Wait, let me finish. Now we are turning out people who go along with this, who think, of course.
Because that's all they're taught and that's all they know. When we went to school, we were taught how to critically talk about critical race theory. We were taught how to try to critically differentiate between different theories and different ideas and then choose for ourselves. We weren't taught one theory and that was it. That's communism, that's fascism, that's whatever ism you want to call it.
That's true, but I've noticed something while I was still teaching. Students would be talking about something. Students would get up and state their view. And then when I would ask, well, what evidence do you have for this? They would look at me puzzled. In other words, they no longer are impressed by the idea of proof, of facts, of logic, of reason. They just aren't. They think if they say something, especially if they're passionate, they're done. Your attitude is, they would call it a very old-fashioned attitude, and they would probably call you a racist to boot.
But I am.
No, you're not. You're very.
No, I mean, I can't listen. I can't help it because of the fact that I don't go along with this, as you called it, Michigas.
Well, we'll keep an eye on this. I hope anyone listening can get some idea of what critical race theory is about.
If anyone's listening, they ought to go to their own school boards and see what's going on.
These theories are coming at us fast and furious. Maybe next time or the time after, we'll talk about the book that has had a lot of influence in the world, especially in education, which is When Harry Became Sally. But we can only, I don't want you to pass out, so we're just going to do one tough issue at a time. I thank you very much for joining me.